So I think it's really just been over the course of this whole year that a number of things have changed. First of all has been the sort of realization that, and this is a realization that's helped me in solidifying my decision to get top surgery as well, just that I don't necessarily have to have my gender identity or even like a coherent philosophy on gender like totally worked out and totally figured and settled before I pursue these things. These things don't necessarily have to have any implications for my gender identity. I can identify pretty much however the heck I want and still pursue testosterone, and that doesn't make any difference. Obviously, it will make a difference as far as how I'm perceived, so I want to make sure that I am comfortable with the implications of that, but that doesn't have to have any bearing on my actual gender identity. So that sort of general realization, and not because it's not just a realization, it's coming to actually convince yourself and having a conviction of that, which I think takes some time to develop because it is counter to what our society generally says about gender and sex and that whole system. So anyway, so that movement certainly helped. But also, another thing that helped was frankly just being able to see myself in not really female perspective. Like, I think as long as I had this basic assumption that as long as I sort of felt on some level that I wasn't sure that I wasn't female, if that makes sense, that I didn't sort of have a strong notion of myself as having some sort of a trans identity, whatever that may be, I still felt bound, to be honest, by sort of many of the conventions and pressures that are put on women of any sort. Frankly, whether they're feminine or more butch or whatever. I think there are still expectations that you should look a certain way. You should present yourself a certain way. And for me, I think body hair was a major part of that. It's sad and it runs a little bit counter to my first point, but I think in some ways it was really, really difficult for me to extricate myself from some of those expectations before I managed to put a little bit of distance between myself and a female identity. So, I've been thinking about that and reflecting on that, and I feel like it's problematic, but just to be totally honest and put it out there for the record, that was part of what allowed me to feel more allowed to feel okay about body hair or even want body hair, so that took me a little bit, that just took a bit of time for me to develop and a bit of processing. I started just doing things like growing out my leg hair, for instance. Like, I had been shaving pretty regularly. And then I just started letting it grow out like last spring, like last April or May. And, ever since I started growing it, I'm like, oh, this isn't so bad. I wouldn't mind a little bit more of this, actually. And so things like that have just sort of increased my level of comfort with the possibility of, even further growth and stuff. Also, I think in a way, getting top surgery helped solidify my decision as well. Like, it was the sort of thing where I sort of saw top surgery as an interesting litmus test. I mean, first of all, I'm really fortunate to have even been in this position, since obviously top surgery can be really difficult to access, but because I was fortunate enough to have it in advance, I thought I would try to treatment as a kind of a litmus test for myself. Like, either I would be totally satisfied and that would resolve the dysphoria and I would be good, or, it would become clear that that wasn't enough and that I needed to take further steps. So that was really helpful. I mean, on the one hand, like, it definitely did make me feel a lot better. But then I also, dysphoria started to consolidate around different things, and I figured I would probably want to try to address those as well. So that was, yeah, like I say, a really helpful thing. It would have been, I think, really difficult for me to decide to go into testosterone prior to top surgery, because I would never just be sure, like, whether that in particular would help, or whether most of the discomfort was in fact coming from my chest, because it was pretty obvious that that was the case, and it just wasn't clear to me how bad the other forms of dysphoria were. So that was a really helpful experience, and I was really fortunate to have had the opportunity to take that step before too. So that's helped. And then also, and again, this is, maybe a little problematic and doesn't fit into my ideals about gender, but like, even the process of like living basically as male, like, being known by Ian and male pronouns and stuff, that has also solidified my desire to start testosterone, because, although I totally admire people who do live as male without having any hormonal intervention, that's really awesome. I totally, kudos to you folks. That's really great, and you should totally do that if that's how you feel your gender identity is. For me, that felt difficult. That felt like there was some tension and frankly a lot of like just awkwardness there, and I'm a really, really, really awkward person already. I don't need any additional awkwardness in my life. In that regard, I've kind of come to that conclusion. But you know, I think I needed to live as male for a couple of months before feeling, you know, assured of that. You know, in some sense, it's interesting because when back, you know, before when I was imagining the different routes that my transition could take, I thought, well, I could basically either just get top surgery and kind of live a genderqueer existence and not necessarily change my name or pronouns, or I could, you know, pursue T and also a name change. And I never really imagined those things as happening separately from one another. So in a way, it's interesting that I actually have lived now about 4 months since starting to come out as Ian and he without starting testosterone, because that's just not really what I initially envisioned. But I think it's so in a way I'm sort of doing what I imagined all along. It's just taken a little bit longer, but I don't necessarily think that that was a bad thing. Like, I'm kind of glad that I'm starting this now, and I don't think I really would have been especially ready to start it much earlier than now, but I think now is a good time. So it's taken me a while. It's been a process, but I am really excited to be taking this new step, and I'm super, super excited for the months ahead. So I will keep you posted as to how all of that goes, and thanks, everybody.